What's happening, everyone, and welcome to Al Chile Boxing Talk. We got the whole Al Chile crew here, and we have a special guest that'll be joining us very shortly, Dave from the 408. Our homie from the ShoeShine went over to Las Vegas, and man, he's going to report to us what his experience was like and what it's like when you have a good seat in the house to check things out, man. So until then, what's up, fellas? How y'all doing?
Living the dream, man. Happy to be here with the brothers and talk some boxing. Man, so much going on, but that's what makes it fun, man. It's holiday season, but it's also pugilist season too. We got some good fights on the deck, and looking forward to talking it over with you guys.
Man, dude, you're not kidding, dude. It's week after week of good boxing, bro. Like, it's been a real pleasure. Run, what's happening with you, man?
Nothing much, man. It just seems I always look forward to being on the show, and it seems like every week, even though it's only 7 days apart, it always seems longer and longer, especially after you have a big fight. So I'm looking forward to the show.
And Nopal, man, what's happening with you, brother?
Man, what's up with my avatar, bro? You messing with me or what?
Hey, man, I think it looks good on you, bro. To be honest,
Dude, I gotta get rid of this one, man. How'd you do that, Chicano? You playing me or what?
You're getting played, brother.
that's a dude from
Oh man.
Napoleon Dynamite, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
The
You got
brother,
the
the
do-rag
brother
on,
Chip.
huh? Chip.
Moving to Detroit.
Our brother Black and Brown Box is in the house. Thanks for joining us, man. Hope you're doing well. All right, dude. Well, while we're waiting for Dave, man, let's get right into the fight, man. We had an awesome fight. We had Shawn Porter going down, losing to the winner, the victorious Bud Crawford. One hell of a fight, man. And I want to get your guys' takes. I want to know, like, what your thoughts were for the rounds, and the ending itself. And yeah, man, let's just pass it around. Shawn, let's start with you, man. What'd you think of the fight?
Awesome fight. And thank God because I was kicking myself for. I was like, damn, man, I should have been Team Stream. Holidays coming up. Yeah, but because that undercard was killing me. But the main event was, awesome as I expected. A big statement made by Team Crawford, and he shows why he is a pound for pound talent. I mean, I love to watch him. He figures guys out. His boxing IQ, his skill and athleticism in the ring is just a thing of beauty. And I was very much entertained by the fight. And then shout out to Shawn Porter, man. He had a good game plan. Despite what Kenny thinks, I thought he was in great shape. I thought he looked good. I thought he executed well. But like anything else, those body shots, I thought they started taking his soul away. I had it after the sixth round, 4-2. But after that, I didn't give another round to Porter. I thought that, he started being taken apart by Crawford, and Crawford did his thing as he always does, and he found that perfect shot. And that's another thing. He always gets perfect placement on his shots. And when he smells blood, he's going to eat. And he ate in that 10th round, and, what a fight.
Excellent, man. Great observations. And yeah, we're going to talk about that stoppage here in a little bit. The stoppage that Kenny Porter gave us all. And we all have a lot of opinions on it, I think. So, Run PMC, what you think of the fight itself, man? And Crawford's performance, Shawn Porter's performance, and how'd you have it scored?
Yeah, I was thoroughly entertained by this fight. I mean, two great fighters, two guys that stay in the gym all the time, always come in shape for their fights, and they both put on great performance. I was with Sean on this 1 through 6. I think that he was saying he had Porter up 4-2, if I'm correct. I had Porter up 4-2 as well, and then but after that, um, obviously it was a shift in the tides, and it was probably the body shots, and it's also with Porter's pressure. They said it in the broadcast, but also I've noticed in fights is that especially as of late, when he puts on the pressure, he starts getting a little wild towards the latter half of the fight. And you can't do that with a sharpshooter like Terrence Crawford, who's just an all around boxer and can do everything. And the body shots caught up to him. And I also think I think it was sometimes I think with Sean, I've seen, even though like these two of my favorite boxers, Sean Porter is probably my favorite boxer or was until he retired currently. But I think sometimes with Sean, the big lights get to him and he gets a little too jazzed up. And you could tell because he'll like have these ebbs and flows where his energy is like really crazy. And then he'll just go down and sort of tank for a little bit. And you can't have those lax rounds against Crawford because then he'll just exploit it and he could, like you said, he could spill blood in the water. But yeah, I rewatched the fight because initially I had it at the time of the stoppage, Porter up 86-85, but then rewatched it and I changed my seventh round. I ended up giving that Crawford. So it ended up being 86-85 in Crawford's favor. And I just think it was like they say, tale of two fights. I think Porter was very active in the first half of the fight, and Crawford, I was sort of like I wasn't understanding what he was doing because he was landing some punches, but I was thinking, I'm like, is this the lack of big fight experience, or is he just playing with them? And it could have been a combination of both, because it's being clearly Crawford's biggest fight, and probably his best opponent as well. But he ended up just doing what Bud does and got the stoppage, got those 2 knockdowns. I obviously think Porter could have continued because I don't think a guy gets knocked down, is banging his hand on the ground, starts jumping up, ready to go, and then his dad stopped it. So, I mean, I was sort of joking about in some of the like group chats or maybe in the chats of some of the other shows, but Adrian Broner said long ago, even though this is more of a joke, that Kenny Porter always wants to shine over Shawn. He'll never let Shawn shine. She says Kenny has the better house, Kenny has the better cars, Kenny has the hotter girls. He says all those things, and it's like
Oh
I don't
man.
know if that was it, but it's just sort of a funny thing that Broner, when they before they fight, said that, and then now you have Kenny saying, "Oh, we'll talk about it at breakfast tomorrow. He'll be over at my house for breakfast." It's like, this is your son, like 30, 34 years old. And it's like, I get you guys have a very unique relationship, but this is his career too. And I don't know. It didn't strike me the right way. But as you see, like Kenny Porter throughout all training camps, he just sort of, even though he got his son here who was a football player, which is amazing, and he got him to a 2-time world champion. And he fought everyone, but it seems like Kenny likes the limelight a lot, especially when they have media days. He's like screaming at Shawn, and they're just like running very simple drills. So interesting stuff. But that was my take.
Dude, I agree with a whole lot of that, man. And Noteball, what'd you think of the fight itself, man? Like, what'd you think about how'd you have it scored? And I also want to know, like, what do you think about the stoppage in particular? And then after that, I'll give my take, and then we're actually going to talk about Kenny Porter and his decision and all that. So tell me, man, how'd you see the fight?
Well, I didn't quite score it, but I thought it was a very exciting fight. I believe the early rounds, Shawn found a way to steal the round. In my opinion, that's what I'm going to call it. He kind of just did enough to get the rounds, and because Crawford is in there, collecting data, as everybody else says, he's just, Crawford, he's just in there getting ready and observing the other fighter, trying to find weaknesses and stuff. Porter found a way to steal those rounds, and about halfway through the fight, you could tell that just like Run said, it was a shift in momentum. You could see that Crawford was gonna start, doing his thing. And I wanted to say, man, one thing about Crawford is when you see him switch, when he fights in southpaw, man, it's like he's a real southpaw. You know what I mean? He can do it really good. I don't get the same thing from Daniel Jacobs when I see him going in the southpaw. It's like he's, you can easily see that he's just trying to kind of throw the other guy off game. This guy's the real deal. And, he belongs on the pound for pound list up there, number 2, number 3, however you want to have him. But he just needs to get a couple more good fights and, move up maybe to 154, and he'll be one of the best dudes. As far as the stoppage, I did think it was early. I think that he should have let him keep going. And, it's like the exact opposite situation of Gabriel Flores. A lot of people were coming down on Gabriel Flores Sr. for stopping the fight, not stepping in there and saving his son, but his son actually made it all the way through. And I think that the dad chose to show some tough love. And I don't know what the thing was. Maybe they, as far as Kenny Porter, maybe they had some kind of plan, like, he was going to mercifully save them or whatever, So I did think it was an early stoppage. I wanted to see if Porter could come back and, make it all the way through at least. But, it is what it is.
Well, hey, man, I hear you. A lot of great observations, man, all around. You guys, pretty interesting takes. I'm going to give mine here in a second. But first, we got our special guest, Dave from the 408. You all know him from the ShoeShine, one half of the ShoeShine with his homie, Drew Evo. What's up, Dave?
Chicano Prophet, what's up, guys? Nice to be on here with Al Chile. I typically work, so I'm happy to be here and have this week off to be here and chatting with you guys.
And we appreciate it, man. We always love hearing your take. And dude, yeah, I saw your video, your review about like what it was like in Vegas regarding the undercard. And dude, I just wanted to get your take, man. You were there. Tell us about the vibe. tell us about how you were feeling about the rounds themselves as they were going by in the finish, man. And you know, I know your time is limited, so please go ahead and tell us what you have to say.
You know, I was telling you privately how unusual the vibe was, and I think it's because it was the first time I've been to a Top Rank with a PBC collaboration. So it wasn't typical at all of like going to a Top Rank card where, you know, the whole undercard is kind of stacked, and you know that any of those fights could be a real potential, you know, steal the show type. When it started off with that whole Adam Lopez, who I was looking forward to, I've interviewed him. That thing just kind of spiraled out of control with the headbutts and the mismatches. The crowd wasn't feeling the undercard at all, for one thing, right? But the main event lived up to all the hype and all the expectations. So regarding that, man, that was really, really good. The main event was good. I don't know how much more of these collaborations we're going to see, because most people say that Canelo Alvarez undercard with Caleb Plant sucked also. I mean, do you guys agree on that?
Oh, definitely. You know, and to be honest, I really didn't even watch too much of it until the main event. I just, these days, man, with pay-per-views, you know, I think it's become a habit. I used to have to throw fight parties, and I was too busy cooking anyways to watch the undercards. But now that I'm here, you know, like if it's not high quality, I'm not interested. Like I'd rather just, you know, talk with my lady or get blazed or whatever, you know. So I know what you mean, man. Like it's not what it used to be. That's for sure.
Yeah, but and to, I know this is probably off topic, but it's really on my mind is, you know, all the pay-per-views, if the undercards aren't stacked, and then you start to see numbers, preliminary numbers like 190,000 pay-per-views sold, that's really abysmal, you know. And I kind of started to rationalize Bob's point of view about losing money on Terrence Crawford fights. Like maybe there's something to that. Now, there's no question in my mind he could sell a fight and actually get some amazing live gate numbers, but it was really inexpensive to go. Like I had fantastic seats and I spent less than $300 for a pair. I mean, I was right behind the production television crew for $300. If you wanted to go see Canelo just a few weeks ago, the nosebleed started at $300 face value, and by the time of fight night, they're at least $600 a piece, you know, and that brings Canelo's live gate numbers astronomical into like the high 17 million area. So I don't know. I'm concerned about Bud Crawford going forward as a independent fighter. He can pick these fights, you know, that was the hot topic immediately, him leaving Top Rank. But can he sell pay-per-views? Because I don't think he can. You know, like a lot of the pay-per-view sales probably had something to do with Shawn Porter's name brand and name recognition. He needs quality dance partners, right?
Well, he really does. I mean, and that's the thing, dude. Like, I think a lot of these welterweights think too much of their own value. Well, at least Spence does, in my opinion. Like, I think, and we can get into this in a little bit, but I'll tell you this, dude. Like, I think Spence and Crawford, I think that less than 700,000 probably. Like, I don't think there's any way you can kind of cook that fight a little bit longer. But Dave, I wanted to ask you, bro. Like,
yes.
And I don't know if you mentioned this. How'd you have the fight scored when you watched the fight live, and like, what'd you think of the finish?
I was really impressed with Shawn Porter early, but I mean, you know, Bud Crawford's very much like Canelo Alvarez. He's going to be in my top 3 pound for pound. I was really impressed with Shawn Porter in those early 4 rounds, and I did have him tied up at about round 6. I had this a draw, but I know, you know, once you saw Terrence Crawford switch into the southpaw stance, and you guys just brought it up, how dominant he is as a southpaw, that he was going to make those adjustments. And I was really impressed with Terrence Crawford's corner telling him, look, you're down on the cards, which probably wasn't necessarily true, or maybe it was a draw when that statement was made. And he just turns up, man. He's a mean dude. One of those things that I like about Terrence, but I think also works against his star status, is that he's just a mean guy. He's not likable. He's not a likable persona, right? That's like something that Floyd was so charismatic. You either felt one way or another about him, but you felt something about Floyd, which is why he was such a commercial success. Terrence just doesn't have that, but he's a mean dude in the ring. Look at his his finishing percentages. Very impressive stoppage. Or too early though. But I agree with everyone here, man. That Shawn Porter's dad throwing in the towel disgusted me, and it also disgusted the crowd in real time. Everyone around me wanted to see this come to an end all the way. They wanted to see the full 12 rounds, and that included the Crawford fans that flew all the way from Nebraska. I think they wanted to see this go the full 12 rounds.
Oh yeah, man. And so, I agree with pretty much everything all you guys said. Great observation. So we have one hell of a killer panel here. And I have to say, man, like Crawford really did impress me. Like when I watched this fight, I had Crawford up. I didn't really score it, but I knew I had him up. And I looked at the fight again, and I pretty much had the same rounds. I think you could give Porter easily, you could give him 4 of those rounds. And in fact, I think you could actually have Porter winning. Like when I watched the fight live, shout out to my friend, shout out to Brian, if you're listening, like, a lot of them had Porter up, and I personally didn't see that when I was watching it live. I felt like Crawford did have control of the fight, but Ron, you made a comment, I think, before we went online, but that, it's just that sometimes Crawford wasn't doing enough, but I always felt like he had control of the fight. And when I watched the fight again, yeah, you could see how, even though Bud Crawford did have control, it seemed like Shawn Porter was the guy who was sometimes making the fight a little bit, or sometimes it was pretty even, and, a round could be left up into interpretation. So I do see the argument for Porter being ahead, but we did see that Bud Crawford has that next level where he can just, boom, put it into another gear, kind of like how Canelo does it. But I think Canelo's a little bit more in control. It's hard to gauge this for a couple reasons. But they're similar too, because Bud Crawford, he knocks his opponents out often in the later rounds. He's got power. So there's a lot of things to consider. I do think that Shawn Porter should have been given an opportunity to continue. And I want to talk about that now, because that's been on my mind a lot. And I watched it again, thinking, well, was this fight stopped too early? And it sounds to me like the panel seems to think so. And I do too. When I watched it, I thought Porter was kind of figured out. Like once Terrence Crawford came and like pushed the action and, got up in Shawn Porter's face, well, he had the rhythm down completely. He took a lot of time to get to know how Shawn Porter moves around. And then he just went out there and put the pressure on Shawn Porter. And then because he had Shawn Porter figured out, it kind of turned him into like a one-dimensional, okay, well, I'm going to have to spring forward, to try to get to Crawford. And Crawford was able to utilize that beautiful jab to kind of offset his timing, to give him something else to look at, because with that peppering jab and kind of like that jab he can use to like offset Shawn Porter, it was up in his face. And then, Crawford was able to just make Shawn Porter come towards him to go for broke, and then he just countered beautifully, and he did it twice. And I still had a problem with the stoppage. I think Kenny Porter should have allowed it to continue. In my mind, we all know that this was really going to be his last hurrah. Shawn Porter is not going to get another championship fight. We know that he's smart and he doesn't like the idea of being a gatekeeper. And I don't know, man, like, it would have ended that way anyways. And I would call that stoppage just shy of premature. I mean, I always respect what the coach has to say, but to me, he looked pretty fresh. I feel like Shawn Porter could have easily gone up, and they could have rolled the dice one more time for those two to go at it one more time to see if Shawn Porter could pull that trigger to hit Crawford in the head. Like, I just personally think that it was a bit too early. Do any of you guys have any other thoughts on that?
I think you're right on the money, bro. It was way too early, and I think that that Porter didn't end up going to the hospital. He probably put on his tuxedo and went straight to the club. Him and his dad, after the fight. Yeah, it was definitely too early.
Yeah, I agree. It was too early too, because like Porter is in phenomenal shape. He's always in shape, and you saw he went to sleep briefly when he got knocked down by Spence. He was gone when he got knocked down by Spence, and by the time he was standing up, he was already back in it. So if anyone could be back in it, it's Shawn Porter. But he was getting broken down, and it was inevitable. He might have made it to the end. I don't think so, just based on how it was going, and he wasn't seem like he was getting hurt by the shots, but his body was not. It wasn't responding like he wanted to. Like he might be fine, but his body's telling him no. So that just shows the will of Shawn Porter, and I don't know. I mean, I don't know how I feel because we weren't in the training camp, but I said it. I think it was 2 or 3 shows ago that I didn't like what I was seeing from Shawn in the training camp videos that Fight Hype was putting up. His foot speed just didn't look the same to me, and his speed on the punches didn't look the same that I've seen in the past. That doesn't take away anything from what Terrence Crawford did, because Shawn Porter looked way better than I was going to expect from what I saw in the training footage. And we're not in the training camp, but all credit to Terrence Crawford. But I think Shawn Porter, especially being his last fight, because he's not coming back based on what Kenny Porter said in the past. Because Kenny Porter said that, I forgot if it was an ES News interview or if I forgot what channel it was, might have been Hustle Boss out of Vegas, that he said that Shawn could get another trainer, but he's still going to pay me my cut as a manager and trainer. So, because we have a lifetime contract till he's done with his boxing career. So, I doubt Shawn will come back with another trainer, because then he's basically would be fighting for free after taxes, 2 trainer fees, and a manager fee to his dad. I don't see him coming back.
Chicano, I just want.
I think this fight.
Oh, sorry,
Go ahead,
Nopal.
Dave.
But Nopal brought up something very interesting. I believe you were talking about the Gabe Flores fight earlier this year. Another father-son combo where their father had to make a decision about, ending the fight. But in that fight with Gabe Flores was physically getting hurt, and the damage was accumulating, and you could see it, and you could smell it right through the television. I think like being there at the fight, most people, including the Crawford fans, which was almost the entire stadium, recognized that Shawn Porter was in the fight, and those were flash knockdowns. So there was like a general sense of disappointment. Like we'd like to see him regroup and come back into the 11th round. And if Kenny Porter throws in the towel in between rounds, I think that would have been far better, because Shawn was still in this fight, and according to the scorecards, it was tight.
Yes, it was. Like, the more I think about it, and like the more I watch it, like as I've watched it 3 times now, like the stoppage itself, although like Run PMC says, I don't think it was going to end any other way, but that wasn't 100%. I mean, he still had the ability to pull the trigger, but yeah, it wasn't the same Shawn Porter anymore. Kind of a complicated situation, but I feel like, and especially the way Kenny Porter was talking afterwards, that like there was some ego involved. It wasn't just like a clean stoppage where like, I do think that he had his son's like best interests at heart, but partially, like I think there's a lot of like dynamics going on with their relationship, and sometimes you see fathers let their sons get abused in the ring, right? But it wasn't like that here. It was just a really bizarre thing.
Yeah, you know what, man? I think that it basically at the end of the day, it just came down to they knew what they were up against, and they knew that they had a very slim chance. So I think maybe they got together before the fight and said, "Listen, son, this is gonna be a hard fight. So at the end of the day, if I see that you're going to take too much damage, we might as well just stop it early and, go about our business, because, we'll see what happens, basically." I think the dad just knew that there was no way he was going to win that fight, and, why let him get even more damage? I mean, look at that photo right there. He still looks fresh, but nevertheless, it ain't always about that. It was going to be some accumulation damage, and these guys decided to retire, is what I'm hearing. So that's another sign that, you know what I mean, Shawn Porter mentally, he doesn't got it anymore. If you just retire after a fight like this, I mean, doesn't seem like the logical thing to do. It seems like if you think that your dad stopped it early, you would be like, "Well, Dad, let me prove it to you, that I still got it. Give me another fight, You wouldn't just say, "Hey, I'm going to retire." So, that's what I got to say about that.
Yeah, dude. And while we have a lot, I'd like to say thank you so much for everybody coming in. We got Brian, my homie Brian, Jose R's coming back to give us grief. Thank you for coming back, man. Compra Sakura, JC's in the house. Major Key, nice to see you, man. Jerry E, Brown Gone 1. G Funky Boxing in the building, man. So we're having a good time. And, the only other thing I'd like to add about and Run PMC, I got to say, you really hit the nail on the head earlier talking about that father-son dynamic. I think it's very strange. And I do think that a father-son relationship is very personal. And I also respect when a father is really involved in his son's life. And I think sometimes fathers can kind of have what would be like street smarts or intelligence, and can kind of pass it on to their son, where they see the world in a frame, in a lens, right? And then they can kind of give that to their son. And if their son agrees with what the dad's seeing, and a lot of times like what the dad says and how he sees things makes sense to that son, man, they got a real leg up on life. And you can kind of see that a little bit with Teofimo Jr. and Senior. Senior's always talking, and Junior's like, "Oh, I respect my father. I respect what he has to say." But based on some of the things that he said that have come to fruition, and just the way he has angles on things, like I could see where you go, yeah, my dad knows things, but Shawn Porter's a 34-year-old man, by all accounts, very respectful. He's articulate. He speaks well. He's his own man too. And it's just a weird dynamic. Like Kenny still talks to his son like he's a kid, and like this is like a military relationship. It's very bizarre to me, and I wonder if this has anything to do with his choice to possibly retire. Like the dynamic's weird, and for him to shame his son right afterwards and go, "Oh, well, he wasn't ready, he wasn't prepared." It's like, one, I think you're taking a little bit of credit away from Crawford, and there's no reason to throw Shawn Porter under the bus. Like, the guy tried, he wanted to continue. You called it, like, you made it about yourself. You aired out family drama. It was one of the most bizarre post-fight press conferences I've ever seen.
It's bizarre because he put the blame on his son as opposed to the team, right? And you notice how he said it was my son's doing in camp that made me throw in the towel. The deflection right there, right? It was bizarre, man. It was. But, you know, while you're bringing up the whole retirement issue, I think I applaud Shawn Porter on his career, for one, in this era of welterweights. And I think it was a really smart decision. I don't want to see Shawn Porter become the gatekeeper to Virgil Ortiz, Boots Ennis, or Conor Benn. He's smart to retire now and not be a gatekeeper to those guys. You know, we saw people like Paulie Malignaggi hang on way too late and end up fighting as far as Europe, you know, European level fighters. Good for Shawn.
I agree, man. And I'll just pass it around, dude. Showtime Shawn Porter is officially retiring. I hope it doesn't stick, man, but I want you guys to give your final thoughts on Showtime Shawn Porter if he is just going to leave us and leave the welterweight division. If you have any final thoughts, please feel free to share them with us.
Well, I'll just say real quick that I was, you know, shocked when he announced it. And my hope was, honestly, that he was, you know, being honest and it wasn't reactionary to what had happened in the ring prior with his dad, you know, basically belittling him and kind of just putting it out there and throwing him under the bus. You know, I hope it wasn't an emotional reaction. Sometimes that happens, but he's sticking to his guns. You know I heard his podcast yesterday, The Porter Way, and, you know, he's clearly has a path. And like, you know, Dave said, he's a smart guy. He definitely, and that's the thing, he doesn't see himself as the bridesmaid or the next option, and definitely not a gatekeeper. He sees himself as a champion. And that's another mixed message I got, because he was talking about how good he felt with Bernardo Osuna. Like, you know, I can fight him right now. He said, you know, I feel like I can go again right now. But at the same time, he said, well, my decision was already made. So, you know, a lot of emotions are going back and forth. But for me, I do believe he is retired now. I do believe that's the last we've seen him. You know, he had a hell of a career. I mean, a big reason why a lot of the fights that we saw that were happening within the aughts and, you know, the 2000s were because of him. You know, no one else wanted to fight each other from the PBC side. And, you know, it makes sense that he was the one to fight Terrence Crawford, and all his fights were close. You know, so I applaud him, respect his career, and respect the way he's handled himself inside and outside the ring. You know, we lose a real one. And, you know, anytime we lose somebody that wants to smoke, I know everybody's not a fan of Pacquiao. I know everybody's not a fan of Shawn Porter. But as a boxing fan, when you lose people that want to smoke and go in there and put on shows, majority of the time, that's the loss to boxing overall, especially when you have guys, you know, dipping and dodging, playing hide and go seek with their belts. So it's a sad day to me. Respect to his career, but disappointed as a fan, selfishly.
Yeah, I have a little thing. I mean, Shawn had a great career, complete overachiever of what his actual skill set was when he entered boxing. Entered boxing at least to the public eye. From what we saw, my first fight when I saw Shawn was actually at the Tank. I didn't see it live. I watched it on Showtime. Is when he fought Alfonso Gomez, and I'm like, this guy's pretty wild. And I'm like, I don't know how this guy makes 147 either, because he's huge. And then he just every it seemed like every fight he would just get better. I was surprised he beat Devin Alexander. He demolished Paulie. And then from there, he fought the who's who of the welterweight division for the most part up until this fight. And I mean, he's one of the hardest workers in the sport. He shows that you can leave this sport with all your faculties, financially stable from what we know. He talks about investments on the podcast and everything. And it shows what you could get, even if you might not have the skill set, just with hard work and belief in yourself, whether it's in boxing or in life, and what you can achieve. And I mean, Shawn Porter being basically a football player that boxed on the side, being a two-time world champion in the welterweight division is definitely impressive, and wish him the best in his retirement.
What about you, Nopal? Anything to say, brother?
I just had to say that, Shawn is right. I mean, we should be very appreciative anytime we get a fighter like Shawn Porter that was willing to fight anybody, you know, and he was willing to go to Top Rank and fight somebody. That's even more special coming from a guy from the PBC. So, you know what I mean? We should all be feeling bad to lose a fighter like that. But in my opinion, I think he'll be back in a couple of years. You know, on a little bit of time, he'll get that itch to fight somebody, and hopefully he prepares real well.
And Dave, he posted in the chat. He said that Shawn may have the best resume at 147, and I have to agree with that, man. He very well might. And I'll tell you this: he's got one hell of a resume in general. And the other thing too is, when back in the day when I was going against the trolls who were saying that Canelo never fought black guys, I did say like, okay, well, he might have the best resume of black guys outside of Shawn Porter. And this was before he fought Crawford. I mean, he's just fought them all, so salute, to him. If he doesn't want to be a gatekeeper, and he was even mentioning that word, like he knows he's a very smart guy. Like he knows what things look like. I mean, hell, it's his choice. And I do applaud him if he does retire, but I would love for him to maybe consider continuing on. I think D-Style made a good point the other day when he said, hey, maybe he could go up to 154 and make a little bit of noise. I think it's possible. I also think it's possible that he might be able to learn under a different coach. I mean, Kenny Porter has taken him very far. Maybe he could get somewhere very far within 2 fights. Like if he wants to be a Hall of Famer, he might be able to get a belt at 154 and secure that. It's very possible, especially if, and we'll talk about this perhaps later, but if Jermell Charlo or Castano goes undisputed and, either or both of them decide to move up afterwards, which is not unusual. I mean, the 154 division's wide open. I mean, he could make a run and, have a couple of decent fights, but I mean, that's really up to him. And if he doesn't, that's all right. He'll be around. He'll be doing his podcast, his commentating. He's a busy guy. So I just wanted to salute him as well.
Chicano, I just want to say on those 2 points, one about the D-Style point and 154. At 34 years old and taking some time off like Floyd did in midway through his career and then announcing he's unretired, I could see him absolutely coming back at 154 and putting himself in a title position against a Castano or a Charlo. Maybe we're all speculating, but maybe there will be he'll have a change in his heart and come back with a different trainer. That would be really ideal. I don't want to see him in the ring with his dad anymore. But I think, like you guys said, he's a big guy. And actually, he started his career, I think, at middleweight. So, for at 34 to be melting down to 147, I don't know if that, not having to drain yourself that much might have a real good impact on him at 154 pounds.
I agree with that point because Shawn Porter gets bone dry when he weighs in too. And like I remember this was when it might have been actually Gabriel Montoya that when he was interviewing Victor Conti on the Snack channel, or maybe it was Gabriel Montoya's channel. Like this was probably like 5-6 years ago. They talk about like when like they water load for weight cuts, and then they said that Victor Conti does the Shawn Porter does a very extreme water load and hyperhydration for Shawn Porter's weight cuts, and this was back in like 2014-15. So it's amazing that he's at 147 still. But it seems like he's not even the same size. He's sacrificing muscle mass at this point. And I don't know. I mean, from like this might not mean a lot, but from what I saw in the training videos, I don't know if Shawn Porter had enough time to really decay or like get rid of the fatigue he had, because he was sparring high altitude like the fight week against Tank Davis, and I don't know what entailed in that sparring, but I don't know how they periodize a boxer's like training program, but that seems a little too close to a fight, especially to ramp up and go into high altitude when it seems like he's been sparring at like not sea level, but normal level gyms throughout the camp from what we've seen. And then now he goes to high altitude fight week. It seems a little odd to be doing that late in the game. That seems like something you would do at the outset, not at the close.
All right, man. Does anybody have any final thoughts before we move on to the next subject?
Nope.
All right, dude. Well, let's get into it. Salute to Showtime Shawn Porter. And now we're going to talk about the future of this welterweight division. And we're going to start right at the top. The conversations have already started, man. Terrence Crawford versus Bud Crawford. Excuse me. Yeah. It's Terrence Crawford versus, dude, I'm drawing a blank here. I'm so sorry. Errol Spence versus Bud Crawford. Sorry about that, you guys.
Yeah.
Anyways, I wanted to talk about this one, man. Like, I want to know what your thoughts are about this fight in particular, and who do you now have ranked number 1 at welterweight?
Well, I'll just go ahead and say, I have Bud Crawford as a clear number 1 at 147. I think he showed that last night. I'm sorry, when he fought against, I thought that before, honestly. And that's another thing, too. I think the landscape is really kind of set where is really Terrence Crawford's division. It's just a matter of how he can get these fights actually made. I know a lot of people have, their opinions and there's nuances and things that they see in regards to Errol Spence and how he'd have an opportunity. But, look, I'm a huge Errol Spence fan. But I thought even prior to the wreck he had, that unfortunate accident and then the torn retina, that was going to be a tight fight, at that point. But since then, he's not the same guy. You can see that from the Danny Swift fight. I just think there's just levels to this. And I just think that right now that Terrence Crawford is just clearly the better fighter. But from the standpoint of a fan, though, I would like for that fight to happen at some point. I know that Terrence Crawford said on Shawn Porter's podcast, I believe last night, that the 3 fights that he wants is in no particular order. And you guys can think what you will as far as if you think they're the best fights. But ironically, they're all PBC guys. He wants Errol Spence, which he's been saying. He wants Ugas. And then the name that kind of stopped me was he wants Keith, Once Upon a Time Thurman. Those are the next 3 fights he really wants. And, I was like, okay, obviously that makes a lot of sense, as far as name recognition. But, just realistically as a boxing fan, taking biasness out of it, taking the emotion out of it. Those are the 3 names as far as names. But as far as like competition and levels, he beats them all. No problem in my book.
All right. What do you think about this, Dave?
I'm going to piggyback on those great points because those are the only 3 people at welterweight I want to see him fight. I can't see Terrence taking a fight with some of these young, hungry lions. Although I would love to see it, I don't see him doing or making that choice as a business move. So, I mean, it really leaves us wondering if he's going to sign a multi-fight deal with Al Heyman. I want to see him fight against all 3 of those guys, and I favor him heavily in each and every single one of those. And then he can clean out the division and move up to 154. That's really what's going to cement his legacy, is getting that fourth division championship. At 154 pounds, that is going to put him in that list, exclusive list, 4 division champion, and possibly even maybe he could unify these welterweight titles. And can he be the first guy to be undisputed in 2 weight classes? That's what I'm wondering.
Dude, great observation, man. We'll see what happens. Run PMC, what do you think, man, between these 2? Who do you have ranked number 1, and who would you favor if they went heads up?
If you were to just go by who has the most belts, Spence is ranked number 1, but actually who's ranked number 1 would be Terrence Crawford, just based on his ability and his performances. I used to favor Errol Spence if Crawford were to jump up for 140, because I just thought Spence would just beat his body up and attrition would just set in. But at this point, and the last few fights, and just what's gone on in Spence's personal life and his health, I don't see really, a way that Spence can beat him. I think Crawford just has too big of a skill set, too many tools to use against Spence. And Spence, for the most part, unless he fights someone like Mikey Garcia, who's relatively flat-footed, at least when he's in ability to strike position, Spence is very one-dimensional in my opinion. I'm an Errol Spence fan, but I just don't see what it will do to him. And Spence doesn't have the one-punch power that could turn around a fight if he's getting outboxed and beaten up. So, I think Terrence, I don't think he'll stop Spence, but he stopped Shawn Porter even though it was a corner stoppage. So who knows? But I favor Crawford now heavily in the Spence fight. I think if he decides to go the PBC route, he should definitely fight Thurman first, because we know that Spence is going to take a tune-up fight. But like we were saying off air, I think that if Crawford does fight Thurman, then Spence takes a tune-up fight against whoever it is. But then that fight should be only a few months before if Spence and Crawford fight. So it's a sort of it's hyping up the fight. It's making sure Errol's where he needs to be, and then he'll just get into the major fight. But I feel bad for Errol with the spot he's in, but it pays to be active. It pays to be in the gym, and everyone makes their own decisions in their life, and you have to deal with the consequences. And Crawford's always in the gym. He showed who he was this weekend, and I think I've I thought in the past, like personally, that Crawford could have used more personality. But from watching the Blood, Sweat, and Tears documentary series on the Top Rank YouTube channel, you see a little more of Terrence Crawford in that I saw than you see in interviews, because he's pretty subdued in interviews for the most part and is very like matter of fact. But in that, you just get to see that he's really pretty simple, and he's like he loves boxing. He's always loved boxing, and he felt he was overlooked in his career and coming to the pros, and really just wanted to prove everyone wrong. And he's doing that right now, because many people forget that Mikey Garcia was the man at Top Rank that they're trying to bring up as like the young gun, and then he got into the lawsuit, and then Terrence Crawford in the background fights Brettis Prescott and sort of launches him. Went back when Terrence Crawford had the cornrows. He fought Brettis Prescott, and sort of after that started building while Mikey Garcia was inactive. So even then, they were looking at Terrence Crawford as sort of an afterthought, and he's really built up his career for where he wants to be. And now he wants to take control even more and separate from Bob Arum, possibly, because it's not set in stone yet. He said that he's probably made his mind up, but if Bob Arum comes with a good purse for him, fight to fight, who knows? He might stay with him and just use Bob in his corner for bargaining power as his representative in negotiations. But who knows? But I'm looking forward to see what he has coming for the welterweights.
All right, and Nopal, how do you see it, brother?
I mean, when it comes to Spence, I think that people's opinion of Spence has typically been heavily influenced by a bunch of fanboys that, for some reason, they have tried to rate him above Crawford. And I don't understand why they've done that ever. I never thought that Spence was better than Crawford ever. Even when he barely moved up to 147, I thought he could beat Spence then. I've always had Crawford number one as far as welterweights is concerned. And Spence is actually in a tough position right now because he's coming off of that eye injury. And, we know that his previous fight, he had a lot of in-between time where he took some, I don't know if he took some time off or whatever, but he went straight into I forget what fight it was, but he went straight into the fight. What I'm saying is that people expect a certain thing from Spence. So I don't know if they necessarily will accept him coming back and just taking a tune-up and then taking a sweet time to fight Crawford now. The fans are going to expect him to beat somebody good, And I think he's in a tough position. And I personally would really appreciate it if he just vacated his belts, because I really don't know where his career is going to go. And, for Crawford, he's just going to keep going up. He's going to end up fighting Ugas. He's going to take all these fights. And, I think that he will end up being undisputed at 147 because I don't see anybody that could mess with him at that weight class. And he might, like I said, he might have to go up to 154 or just ring at 147, because you have a lot of these divisions where the guys are actually welterweights, but they're still being able to make the weight that are going to eventually come up, like Teofimo, Josh Taylor. All these dudes are eventually going to be welterweights. So he's got a lot of choices, Crawford. And I think the best thing for him would be to sign with Al Heyman, because Al Heyman can provide him with the fights that we have always wanted to see.
Oh yeah, I'm excited for this fight, man. I ended up watching the Errol Spence versus Danny Garcia fight again for reference, and I saw a lot of the same things that Shawn did. It's not quite the same Errol Spence, but I still think he has a pretty effective jab. I think he's kind of also one-dimensional the way Run PMC says, but in a respectful way. I think he's still got good fundamentals, really good at tagging the body, really good at using his hooks when there's an opportune time to. And I was kind of thinking about how this fight in particular would play out because I know all the skills that Terrence Crawford has. I've always had him ranked top 3 pound for pound. And if you had to ask me like which one of these two should be at the top of the division, I think it's subjective. I think nobody's really right. Nobody's really cleaned it up clearly, in my opinion. I would probably favor Crawford. And in the fight itself, like I think I would favor Crawford, but to me, there's still a reason that we all want this fight. Like, I still think that this is a close fight. I think that Terrence Crawford can do a really good job, but just like we saw in the Shawn Porter fight, like sometimes he's not doing enough. And if people could conceivably have Shawn Porter up in that fight legitimately without hating, then I think it's very possible that Errol Spence could easily take those early rounds. I mean, if you look at that Kell Brook fight, like it was kind of like a war of jabs when Terrence Crawford has to fight somebody who's taller and kind of has the similar reach, and which Errol Spence does have a similar reach and is taller. It's kind of, he has a little bit more trouble kind of getting that jab through, and he kind of likes to kind of get in, but he doesn't like to just crash the pocket. Bud Crawford's not like some big bruiser. Like, he needs to try to box, and he might have to use his footwork a lot more. I did see a lot of good footwork that I was wondering about in the Porter fight. Crawford was able to move around and utilize that a lot, but I do see this being Bud Crawford's toughest fight, no doubt about it. I don't think that Bud Crawford could just walk down Spence at the end through just like, rounds of abuse. Like, I'm not so sure about that. So when I look at this fight, like, I do see it as a coin flip, man. Like, I still think it's a good fight. I do think that Errol Spence is kind of turning into a little bit of a punk with all this. Like, and I'll tell you why, man. Like, we've been waiting a long time. Like, I remember when people were pissed off that we were waiting on the Canelo Triple G fight. By all accounts, we had to wait 2 years for that fight. We've been waiting 3.5 years for this fight. And it's just like, it's just overdue, man. Like, we're just all getting tired of it. It's hard to even get excited about it. Hard to even to try to demand it, because I'll tell you this, like, I understand, like, when Spence said, oh, well, I'm going to fight Pacquiao first. Like, I actually understood that one. Yeah, you got to fight Pacquiao before you fight Crawford. It makes sense on a whole lot of levels, right? But now that fight's not available, like, it doesn't make any sense to me to go for Ugas first. Like, the fight we want to see is the Crawford fight. And then we've mentioned how Bud Crawford is 34 years old. If this fight pops off any later than September, well, then he will be 35, the same age that Triple G was when he fought Canelo. But, everybody back in the day was talking about how Canelo aged out Triple G. Well, we don't hear any of that talk here. And I'm not sure if it's because maybe Spence is of a similar age, but I'll tell you, mid-30s and early 30s, there's a big difference there.
Yeah, especially at the lighter weight classes, meaning, even I know this is like sort of a middle weight class if you include all of them, but welterweight guy at 35 is going to be a lot different than a heavyweight at 35, just
Right.
because you're relying more on speed and you're just relying more on movement. Whereas, I mean, in the past we've seen heavyweights move like that, but it's just a generalization I'm throwing out there. But no, I agree with you. Like, this is still going to be a good fight. I just think Crawford wins now. I used to think Spence would win, and now I think Crawford wins, just based on all the factors we have to consider. And that's not taking anything away from Crawford if he indeed does win, but I just don't see Spence. Like, all right, I'll frame it like this. I think it's going to depend on what Spence does. If Spence is willing to exchange, we'll have a closer fight. If Spence is gun shy, like I thought he was a little gun shy in the Danny Garcia fight, whose power really hasn't carried up to 147 there it was at 140. Like, he's had stoppages at 147, but nowhere near of the level of fighter that he's going to be fighting if he fights Terrence Crawford, or if he even fights Ugas, nowhere near that level of boxer. So we'll see if he's like, if Spence is like going to maul guys like he did Kell Brook, then it's an interesting fight. I still think Crawford might win, because Spence's eye might blow up and it might just get stopped that way. It might just be like that. It's nothing against Spence. He might have the heart, but if the doctor advises that it's stopped and the ref stops it, he stops it. So I still think Crawford will win, but it all depends what Spence does, but I don't see a way, based on Spence's last performance, that he's going to be able to blunt what Terrence has to offer to him. That's just how I feel now.
No, I mean, you guys bring up good points. I mean, because like Chicano just said, if anybody thinks that, I know the fake photos and I want to get into that whole charade or whatever, but if you really think that, Spence didn't want that Pacquiao fight, I mean, come on, anybody would want that fight. So can his body even hold up at this point? So I think you guys bring up a good point from the standpoint of technically in the ring and what he can bring. Is just that there's so much unknown as far as like Spence, and as he gets older and the wear and tear from the fights, and him of surviving a life-threatening car crash that and then the torn retina. It just, I really have the fight in such serious doubts. And from what I'm hearing, the PBC, which they're always going to put themselves first, that they're more in line and more inclined to have Spence versus Ugas first, which I know we may not want, but I really think that's what's going to wind up playing out. And I would like to hear your thoughts on, do you guys find it weird that Crawford would say, Keith Thurman? Like, why would you say that name? Like, maybe they have something already lined up. It's just because he holds them in high regard, because he knows the name, because maybe there's money attached to it. I know there really is no one else at 147 that isn't a young lion, like Dave mentioned, but I just thought it was just kind of strange. And I know I mentioned it already, but that just was hard for me to kind of frame that in my mind. It's going to be, and then Thurman said he needs 8 more months on top of that. So it's just kind of strange that somebody that's ready to kind of catapult their career and kind of, cash out on a big way as far as Crawford, to bring up somebody that's, I don't even view as an active, relevant fighter, to be honest.
I agree with that. I found it strange too that he was calling out Thurman, like, really? But coming from Top Rank and his what he charged Bob with, that you couldn't get me these fights when I was with you. So now it's like he's got to play catch up and go after all the big names that were relevant at 147. Even though to us boxing purists, we know that Keith Thurman's best days are long behind him.
Oh yeah, I want to highlight what Chauncey Pearl says. He says if Crawford been buzzed by the likes of Gamboa and Mean Machine, then Spence has the ability to sleep Crawford. The only thing is how he's going to be after that eye. I mean, that is a fair point. Like, that's the other thing too. Like, it's not like Crawford can't get buzzed a little bit. We've seen it also, dude. Like, he took a lot of punches. Actually, he takes a lot of punches in general. Like, his defense isn't all that great. I think he utilizes his legs well when he kind of wants to keep a distance, and he's really good at that. And I used to buy into this theory that, well, he takes punches to land punches and to kind of get in the ebb and flow of things. But no, man, I think sometimes he although he's very tough, don't get me wrong, like, I think he could benefit from being slightly better defensively. And Shawn Porter was hitting him with all kinds of things. On top of that, dude, Errol Spence, high volume dude, not going anywhere and has grit. I've always said, man, this guy has tenacity. I mean, hey, and so does Bud, dude. Don't get me wrong, but man, I just, on top of that too, like, I think Errol Spence might be a little bit stronger. I think that he can continue to go on the back foot if he wants to. But in this fight, I think he's going to be on the front foot more. I don't think he's going to be made to be on the back foot. I think when he wants to, he can really push the action. In that Danny Garcia fight, I felt like he had the fight in hand. He didn't necessarily need to push the action. It was in Danny Garcia's best interest to push the action in those middle rounds. And he didn't want to commit. He didn't want to get in the pocket and mix it up. And I think Spence was fine with that. But in a dogfight, like we saw in the Shawn Porter fight, Errol Spence can bring it. And I think he will bring it. I don't think he's going to back up. And I don't know, man. Like, I'm not calling the Spence victory, but I very well might. If we did have more fights to assess, I would totally watch them. But it's just hard to say right now based on the limited information we have on Spence.
Yeah. I just hope that Spence comes back healthy so we can have, a heated, not heated, but a healthy conversation about how the fight would go and that they can actually make it. I mean, that's all a brother wants, man. That's all I want for Christmas, man. Let's get these fights confirmed. No more fantasy boxing. Let's make it happen.
Totally, man. Anybody got any final thoughts before we move on?
I was just going to say that if Spence does fight Ugas, or he does have like a quote unquote tune up, even though Ugas is not a tune up, before the Crawford fight, then I could my opinion might totally change, because I've started with I thought Spence would beat Crawford, and then now I'm on the Crawford. So it might be just because it's biased to something that was just recent. So, and we haven't seen Spence. We rarely even see training footage of Spence. So it's just like, it's the unknown. But I mean, everyone makes good points. But I still think at this point that Crawford will win. But if Spence just steps to Ugas and just breaks him down, then it's like, oh, I have to probably reassess and watch some other film on Crawford, watch the Porter fight over, and then just go back into it. But at this point, Crawford. But who knows if Spence has a dominant victory over Ugas or whoever he fights.
All right, man. And hey, while you're all here, dude, I would love to get your thoughts on some of the weekend fights. Like, I mean, if you want, we could just kind of go in order. And this is kind of a pop-up. I didn't really prepare for it, but man, like, now that it's fight week and I've been hearing more coverage, I am excited about these fights. And I want to know what you guys have to say about the Teofimo versus Kambosos championship fight at lightweight.
Well, I'm glad we talked about, fantasy boxing, like, knock on wood. Let's hope nothing happens, man. That fight actually happens versus Teofimo Lopez and Kambosos. I mean, talk about a merry-go-round, a roller coaster from hell, going up and down. I mean, 7 times that fight was announced. If you got all 7 posters, man, shout out to you. You're a real boxing fan, So they're finally going to fight this weekend. I'm excited. Shout out to Coach Centeno, who's going to be in the corner for Kambosos. And, I'm ready, man. And I'm going to be honest, just put it out there. I'm not the biggest Teofimo fan for the stuff he does outside the ring, but I absolutely respect what he does in the ring. And I'm not even talking about the Canelo. I don't care about that. I'm talking about some of the antics he's done in the past in regards to just being a dumbass. You know what I mean? But what I found that the stuff that I have issue with is really not even him. It's more about like his dad. And anyway, so he talks a lot of trash on Twitter. I don't care about that. I care about boxing, and I'm excited for the fight. And I think it's going to be a hell of a fight. But I do think Teofimo is just too much. I think he's levels above. Kambosos is a tough fighter. I'm praying that his chin can hold up so it can be more of a competitive fight, because I think it's going to be a banger. But realistically, I can't see the fight going past 4 rounds. I just think that, Teofimo is just that much more talented. All respect to Kambosos. I think that if he does have more of a chin, I know that Kambosos has a decent right hand. But even against Lee Salisbury, he showed some, questions as far as like taking shots to the body. So I just take Teofimo on that one. And we talking about both fights, right?
Yeah, I thought we'd pass it around with this fight first, and then after that,
okay,
we'll do the Figueroa one.
All right. So yeah, that's all I have on that. So I can't wait. I'm glad it's happening. I don't want to jinx it. So let's go. Shout out to both fighters. Just show up, please.
Nice. So Dave, tell us what you think, man. And if I recall, I think your brother in crime, Drew Evo, has Kambosos winning this fight, right? Yeah. Speak on his behalf, please.
Well, actually, I haven't heard any prediction from Drew, but I think most people who are know about the ShoeShine know my co-host Drew's opinion of, or more or less, on Teofimo's situation. But look, this fight has been marinating for so long because we had all these debacles with this new promotional company entity, Trilla, and Teofimo had this a surprising win over Lomachenko and put him in this position where he felt that his market value was way beyond what Bob Arum was willing to pay. That led us into this long delay, and Trilla just fallen to pieces, not being able to bring this fight into fruition. But during that whole time, I've watched Kambosos' fights, and his resume doesn't indicate that he's gonna pull this off. The resume doesn't look good, but he talks a good game. He really does talk a good game. And I want to just address this in the chat, because I really do feel like Teofimo, when we talked about father-son relationships earlier, some of the most successful ones, we talked about Sean Porter, we brought up Gabe Flores, and we have this unique one where Teofimo and his father have done something remarkable and incredible. They've got 3 of the 4 titles at lightweight in less than 16 professional fights. That's incredible. So there's going to be a gratitude that Teofimo has. I mean, he must feel in debt to his father tremendously. But at some point, I really believe Teofimo's going to have to become his own man and branch off from his father. Already people are calling his father a distraction. It's clear that his father's living vicariously through his son, right? That's my opinion. He's like Angel Garcia on steroids. So at some point that Teofimo's going to have to be his own man, branch off from his dad to take himself into the next stage of his career. And that's, making a successful run at 140 pounds. I have him, Teofimo, a heavy favorite on Saturday night.
All right. And Run, how do you see this one, man?
I think Teofimo's going to win, obviously. I don't know exactly how it's going to happen, but I think he's going to win, because Teofimo, like, you could be in the gym, but being in the gym is not the same as fighting. And even though Kambosos hasn't fought, Teofimo hasn't fought as well. So are we going to get a type of like a Nakatani-like performance from Teofimo against someone that he shouldn't have a performance like? We really don't know, but I think he's going to win. Heavy favorite. I would say by stoppage. I can't really predict a round because I don't know how much ring rust he's going to have, but he should run over Kambosos. Like, I sort of watched the Selby fight. I think they had 2 fights on that day, so I think he was just like on my laptop screen when I was watching that. But when he fought Mickey Bay, I honestly thought Mickey Bay won that fight, and that was an inactive Mickey Bay. And like, I know Kambosos got the knockdown late, but I still could have seen Mickey Bay winning that fight. And that was like, Mickey Bay is close to 40 years old at that point, and he's really inactive, stays in shape. But I don't know. I think Teofimo should run through him, but I couldn't pick a round, but I would say if I had to pick one, it would probably be a stoppage before 7 by Teofimo.
All right. Nopal, how do you see this one, man?
You know what? I really don't even care about this fight, to be honest, bro. It was supposed to be an obligation. What was that, like 2 years ago? Not even
Dude,
sure.
we've been
I'm
waiting.
not keeping I'm not even keeping track of time. I just know that it's a long ass time, and in between there's been so much shit talking from his trash ass dad. You know what I mean? Uh, I'm embarrassed that he's Latino. He's not representing us correctly, and you know what I mean. I can't take this sort of attitude from somebody that he's had 16 fights, and yeah, he has some belts, but I mean that doesn't give them the. I mean, he's just beating up on little dudes at 135. We know that he's going to end up at 147. So he's got a lot of work to keep doing. And for him to try to say that he's better than other guys that are already all-time greats, maybe it's just, beyond me. But I can say that if he does go up and fight Josh Taylor, then I will respect both of them on that. But it's the classic thing, what have you done for me lately? So if they take 2 years to go fight Josh Taylor, man, I'm going to be talking a lot of shit about both of these dudes up until then.
Dude, that's a great point, man.
Love
like
it.
that's the thing. Like this week got me excited about the fight, but I kind of stopped caring. I mean, this is a mandatory, and just like you all, I do expect Teofimo Lopez to blow out Kambosos. No respect to Kambosos. I watched a little bit of what he's got going on, and he's not bad, but I mean, he's not Teofimo Lopez. He doesn't have the power. I think he's not. I think he's not bad, but I mean, Teofimo's just going to whip this guy if he's even at 80%. And I say 80% because if you all take a look at this photo, I'm a little bit concerned about Teofimo's weight drained images here that I'm seeing. Like, to me, look at those cheekbones, man. He looks like he's on meth, for crying out loud. I've been concerned about him cutting weight for a while now, and I was thinking back to when I originally got into Teofimo Lopez, and this was like while he was kind of doing his dance moves after KOs, and he was calling out Loma back in the day, and he was sitting there saying like, man, I can't make 135 much longer. I want Loma now. And this was before the fight was kind of even on anybody's radar. And he's still making 135, man. And it's like, and I understand that when you're young, you can rebound, but I mean, at a certain point, it does affect you. So if he just fulfills this mandatory and this fight came way too late and he doesn't have any more business to take care of at 135 because he doesn't really want to make the weight anymore, I salute him for that. If he wants to move up, I'll be happy for him. I think that he should. I think there's a lot of great fights he can make at 140. And sure, he didn't get that quote unquote undisputed moniker. But to me, it doesn't matter. He's the Lenio. He's the man. He doesn't have anything to prove at 135 if he wants to move up to 140.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Something I wanted to add real quick as far as like, my resentment towards, because, I'm a father. We talked about Kenny Porter and the way he threw, Shawn Porter under the bus or under the ring, if you want to say that. And then Teofimo with his dad and the antics. And yeah, Dave brought up a good point. He did get him to that point. They both brought him to that point. But, it doesn't always get to that point, So I have a young guy that's from, Dallas that we've been supporting. I actually shouted him out on the show. And recently he got dropped by Mikey Garcia Promotions because of his dad. His dad couldn't say on social media, interacting with other coaches and talking crap and complaining about his money. And they warned him one time. And then after that, they said if it happens again, they're going to go ahead and drop the son. So that's why I take issue with it. For one, I'm a dad. And these young guys, I don't want their fathers that are trying to live vicariously through their sons to exploit and ruin their son's opportunity. So I take great exception. So if people have issue with it, too fucking bad.
Yeah, you see that all the time with like NCAA recruiting too. Like, unless the guy's like going to be like an NFL level guy or NBA level guy, sometimes the parents could ruin it for their kids, where they're just like overbearing, and the coach is like, I don't want to deal with that for 4 years. We could just get another guy. You're not the only one here. So
yeah, exactly.
It's sad to see.
Yeah, everybody's not a world-class talent. So
Yep.
This young guy, he's 23, and he's going to get his opportunities, I'm sure. Right now, he's sparring with Brown, getting him ready for Benavidez. But this stuff happens all the time, to Run PMC's point, in all other sports. But in boxing, it's even worse. So, yeah, I know Teofimo, he's the man, but everybody's not the man, sometimes they're just the man trying to be the man. And I would hate for people to lose their opportunity for some bullshit. So for all them fathers out there trying to be the star, y'all need to sit the fuck down.
Yeah, and that being said, like, these guys, like we said, these guys, the fathers get them there, and the fathers kept them on the straight and narrow for the most part, and like, props to them for doing that. But that doesn't mean that they can't seek another trainer. Maybe they can stay as like the head trainer on like the quote unquote the head trainer, but you just bring in other guys. Like, I think they brought in another what was his name? He was out of Florida to their camp, Teofimo, that is. He worked with Rigondeaux for a while. I totally forgot his name, but they were working with him, so they're already experimenting with that type of stuff where they're bringing in assistant trainers to offer them some other guidance. So if he wants to do that, maybe it's just like Tio's dad, maybe he's just the front man. But I see that sometimes if Tio loses, then they might use his dad as an excuse why they don't want to give him money or do some things like that. They're just looking for an excuse. But as long as he's winning, he's winning.
Yeah, dude, it might take a loss before, that little partnership separates. And Chauncey Pearl says, yesterday during that little squabble with the Kambosos camp, Taylor looked like he was embarrassed for how his dad acted. Que vergüenza. I don't know if you guys saw that, but I'll tell you, to me, I thought it was a little bit embarrassing. I understand, the head games ahead of time, but, I mean, Teofimo Sr. kind of looked like a punk. He went over there and got handled, and then he just kind of backed off and was like, oh, did you see what those guys did to me? Funny, but, I mean, I don't know. It was a bad look, in my opinion.
Absolutely, man. It was definitely a bad look, and it is the fight game. It's a hurt business, but, that's not benefiting the fighters. And, I thought he looked embarrassed, too, as far as Teofimo Lopez Jr., as, I would be or anybody else. Your father over there acting the clown. You know what I mean?
All right, man. Well, hey, let's move on to a unification fight this weekend. We got Figueroa versus Fulton. I'll be honest, I do know both these guys, but only from their last fights. My knowledge at 122 pounds is not that great. I start taking boxing as far as a fan. I look at it with more interest once we get to around 130, although HCP's kind of got me really looking at 126 and on, but 122, I'm only there for the championship fight. So I really want to defer to you guys. And on top of that, I see people picking this one as a 50-50 one way or the other. So please, y'all, break it down. Let me know what to expect and who you have winning this fight.
Chicano, I got to get going real quick. So if you don't mind, I'll go first.
Please do, man. And thank you so much for joining us, bro.
Oh, anytime, man. Hey, I actually really, really enjoy the 122-pound division. And this one's going to be fantastic because in many ways, Fulton to me is also coming out of the Philadelphia camp is to a miniature Boots Ennis. He does everything so damn well. And Figueroa is your throwback Mexican come forward fighter, who wills himself to victory. So this is going to be a banger of a fight. This is actually the one that I'm really excited about this weekend. I do heavily favor Fulton with even possibly a stoppage this weekend. But there's so many guys at that division at 122 that could not only the other real threat, in my opinion, is that guy MJ. And I see a unification between Fulton. Once Fulton moves on, I'd like to see that unification. But any of these guys are going to be real threats at a featherweight eventually. And that goes for Fulton as well. I heavily favor Fulton with the late stoppage. And thanks a lot, guys, for having me on, man. And next Monday, I'll be coming back late in the evening to do the ShoeShine.
Excellent. Well, that was Dave from the 408, the ShoeShine, a friend of HPP's. Yep, you can catch him on the Roundtable and on his own show. Great stuff, man. He's one of my favorite channels to watch. So, salute. Thanks for joining us. And Run PMC, what do you think about this fight, man?
I'm sort of in the same camp you are. I like watching the championship fights, but ever since Rigondeaux was in that division and he sort of got screwed, I haven't really been the biggest fan. I did watch both their last fights, and no way did I think that Figueroa was going to stop Neri, especially the way he did. That was a shock to me. And Fulton just fought Angelo Leo, who maybe not the most polished, but he was coming off a decent win, but he dominated him. So it's going to be a good fight. I really don't know how to pick it. If I were to lean towards someone, I would lean towards Fulton, but Figueroa is like his older brother in the way, and it seems like he's way more committed to boxing. But he's in the way that it's just has a granite chin for now and just comes forward and the punch volume's high. So it's a pick 'em for me, but if I were to say one, it would be, I can't even say what round or how it's going to be, but I would pick Fulton to win.
All right. So, okay, Fulton to win. All right, great, man. And so by decision or?
I'll lean towards decision.
Okay, well, great, man. You guys got me excited about this one. Like I said, I'll certainly be watching it, and I am learning as far as the lower divisions go. So thank you guys so much for previewing that for us. And so right now we can get into our controversial rescore. Let me put this bad boy up and add it to the stream. I'm excited for this one, man. This one kind of caught me by surprise, dude. When scoring this one, we decided to go back and do Pacquiao versus Marquez 3. This was one hell of a fight, and usually Run PMC just kind of gives us a little breakdown of what was going on at the time. But we're just going to go around and talk about what we remember leading up to this fight. So, Shawn, tell us, man, like, what did you remember about this fight in the lead up, and how do you remember scoring the fight? And then we'll get into the official scores a little bit later.
Yeah, I remember going into the fight that I was extremely excited. It's a hell of a matchup, and the other fights were, barn burners. But I was also thinking, like, okay, this might actually be the end of the chapter. Little did I know it was not, because I felt like, both were coming in well, but I really thought that Pacquiao was coming in, on a real good run. And I also felt like, maybe the age differential, the 6-year age differential had, maybe had a difference. I had a fight party too, like I normally do for big fights. So everybody was, liquored up and ready to rock and roll. And man, I was fired up, and it was a hell of a fight. And I remember everybody, we had a lot of casuals in there. Shout out to the casuals. And
that's right.
Yeah, they were loving it, for a fight that had no knockdowns. And that's another thing too. Like when I went back and watched it, I had no idea. That's how crazy it was in my house, man. Like it was so loud in my house. I didn't realize the crowd was like that electric. So watching it again was like I was getting chills, from a 10-year-old recording on for YouTube. But I was like, man, this fight was like off the chain as far as like the energy and the electricity and just the anticipation of the fight. And there was so much intensity in between the rounds. And even when there was so much chess matching going back and forth as far as strategically trying to position themselves and trying to land that shot. And, Pacquiao trying to get in, and, Marquez timingly perfectly, and Nacho Beristain just being great. So it was just a great fight to watch. I think I told y'all offline that I went and I forgot just how magical that fight was. And I just watched it as a fan the first time. I didn't score it just to kind of get that out of the way. And then I went back and, then I scored it. And then I scored the fight. So I give my score now?
Just a little bit. I just want to kind of see what everybody else had going on, and then we'll get right into it, man, because I want to take the time to really break down this one. Like I took some pretty specific notes because, man, I found myself being very opinionated, but also very open-minded in the scoring of this fight, man. This is probably one of the most interesting ones that I've come across to rescore. So I'm excited to talk about it here in a little bit because I really want to get into it. Run, PMC, tell me, man, like at the time, who did you think was going to win the fight, and how did you score it at the time?
At the time, I thought Manny was going to win the fight. I just thought Marquez. I mean, this is no way to downplay Marquez because he was one of my favorite boxers. But the way I categorize Marquez's career, I didn't really get to see him fight the bulk of his fights at featherweight and the smaller weight classes. But from in between he had great fights in between when he fought Manny. But it seemed that between the second fight and this fight, Marquez was just fighting guys like he fought Juan Diaz, he fought Michael Casitas, but those aren't really marquee names. They were all action fights, but they weren't marquee names. But with Manny in between the second and third fight, he went on the tear that started with David Diaz and it went all the way through Oscar, Ricky Hatton, Cotto, Margarito, Mosley. Like we all know the names, and he went on that like 3-4 year tear. Yeah, right there, exactly. He went on that crazy tear since then. And Marquez was sort of trying to, he had good performances, but it was almost like he was hoping to get that fight. And then at the time, as you know, it was sort of like it was Al Heyman versus Top Rank, or was it HBO versus Al Heyman? We don't really know what it was. But I was thinking, I'm like, okay, if Floyd just beat Victor Ortiz for the WBC, got the belt back, and then Manny's fighting Marquez, if they both win, then we're going to finally get the Mayweather Pacquiao fight. So I was like, I don't really know how to feel about this one, but it was definitely, I think, out of the first three fights, or maybe the whole trilogy, in my opinion, this was the best mix of intelligent boxing, but with power punches, in my opinion. The first two fights, tons of volume. This fight, not as much, but it seemed like it was like, put the cliche aside, it was very much high-speed chess, but with power punches and on both sides. But I'll pass it off to Nopal, but I'm looking forward to seeing how you guys score this one because I'm just looking forward. We'll see.
Awesome. And you remember how you scored it at the time live?
Oh, live, I know I didn't keep a scorecard. I was at my best friend's house who is Filipino. So I think I was leaning though towards Marquez to win, but I didn't score round to round.
Nice. Shout out to the Bay Area Filipinos, some of my
Yeah.
favorite people, man.
Yes.
Straight up. All right, Nopal, what do you remember about this fight going into it, man? And how'd you have it scored at the time?
Well, the biggest thing that I remember from this fight and that sticks out in my mind is actually a funny thing. Is I think Manny Pacquiao had the Eye of the Tiger guy walking him in with the guitar and all that. So I thought that was funny. I think that's what this fight was, because I didn't see the beginning on that his ring walk on the rescore, but that's the biggest thing. And as far as who I thought at the time won, I kind of thought it was pretty even, when I watched it. Of course, I was drinking a lot of beer, so, wasn't able to score it. And, but everybody there was saying that Marquez got robbed, and I think Marquez walked out, and, he looked pretty disappointed,
Oh yeah. And so, taking it back for me, I was younger, I had my hair, I was married, and I think this was the last time that I ever had a true hangover. That night I got thrashed. I haven't been that fucked up since. And I didn't score it either, man. But I'll tell you this, like in the lead up, I did not like this fight for Marquez. Like we're kind of looking at right now the tear that Marquez went through after fighting Pacquiao for the second time, which wasn't bad either, man. He was on a nice, great little healthy run himself. Of course, he did lose to Floyd Mayweather, but it's still an impressive run. Got good KOs. He had some great fights there. But Pacquiao was just on this huge tear, and I remember just thinking, and this was before the Bradley fight, so his aura was even stronger. This was, and he was like, oh my gosh, Manny Pacquiao. Like, a lot of people thought Pacquiao would beat Floyd, and Floyd was scared at the time. Just the optics of it, because this guy was just going through folks. Like he kind of stopped knocking down people. But I mean, the Clottey fight, it's like, well, you could forgive Pacquiao for that because Clottey was just shelling up. And the Margarito fight, well, I mean, that was, at 54 or a higher weight class. And Mosley, well, nobody knocks out Mosley, but he knocked him down, right? So that aura was still there. So I remember thinking at the time that Marquez was going to get hurt. I didn't like this fight for Marquez, but I ultimately, of course, ended up rooting for Marquez. And Shawn, you made a great point. Like when you rewatch this fight, like with so much crowd noise, you kind of forget that, man, like there was actually a crowd there for Marquez. I mean, it was 50-50, but the Mexicans were pretty loud, man, and it made for an entertaining fight. I didn't score it, but I remember thinking that the fight should have gone to Pacquiao at the time. And remember, like I wasn't into scoring, maybe not as much into boxing, a bit more of a casual fan, but Pacquiao, was a casual favorite. And, I loved Marquez. So I was all about this fight. So let's get into the actual scoring of it, man, because I want to talk about this one, dude. And I feel like, we were kind of hazing Shawn by always making him go first. So we're going to start with somebody else. And Run, since you didn't give us the breakdown, man, I think I'll let you go first and tell us what you have to say about this fight.
All right. So it was very entertaining to watch this fight, but I think this was a complete boxing lesson by Juan Manuel Marquez on Manny Pacquiao. I had this fight. Let me just see. I don't know where I put my actual the total. All right, here we go. 116, 112. Juan Manuel Marquez. I had Manny Pacquiao winning the 1st, the 9th, and the 11th. And I had the 11th, and then close rounds. And I'll say it like this. So I had close rounds, meaning like competitive rounds, and I'll differentiate. So the competitive rounds I had were 1, 4, 9, 10, and 12. But the only swing rounds I had were 1 and 12. The other rounds were competitive, but I stand by who I had winning those rounds. So I had at 116, 112, Juan Manuel Marquez. This was wider than I remember it. Honestly, it might have been because I was in Filipino's house, and it was just obviously really, really biased. But I thought that Marquez was just I think he was dominating. I thought the best combo he was using was that lead left uppercut and right hand. Sometimes he'd double up on the right hand. He would jab to the body, and then he would throw like sort of a wide left hook to the body, but it seemed to be landing on Manny all night. And then he would lead with right hands too. And he hit Manny with a few of those punches that in their next fight would hurt Manny, like fake jab to the body, overhand right. He would lead with the right hand, or sort of as a right hand left hook, or no, right hand sort of right hook, sort of hybrid that would spin Manny around in their 4th fight after he knocked down Marquez, and then Marquez spun him around like 10 seconds later. So, and I think Marquez dominated in the 5th, 7th, and 8th round. Manny had good moments, but I feel like I remembered him having better moments 10 years ago, because, and the dialogue was interesting from Freddie Roach after the 6th round. He was saying, "Man, you really need to pick it up." And then Freddie Roach is telling him, "You need to stop him. You need to put him on his ass." Like telling him all these things in the later rounds. And I think the commentary was horrendous for this fight. It was like I had times like Harold Letterman, some of his justifications for like giving Pacquiao the round was just saying I like his style more, not actually what's contained in the fight. And like the voice of reason was interesting was Max Kellerman, because even Emmanuel Stewart and Emmanuel Stewart, who I rest in peace, but I respect his opinion a lot. Some of the rounds he would just like, I'll talk about like the 11th round I thought was a clear Manny Pacquiao round, and then Letterman and Emmanuel said that was a Juan Manuel Marquez round, and then that could lead about what you talk about, like front loading a scorecard where it's like the 11th round. Now you're giving Marquez some rounds, but I thought that was a clear Pacquiao round because I thought Juan Manuel was pumping the brakes already, but then they give it to Marquez on their cards. So it's just interesting, but I think it was a clear win for Juan Manuel Marquez. I think this would be, when we classify, I think this would be a robbery. Yeah, and just, I mean, sure, we'll talk about after we give our cards, but that's just sort of how I feel.
All right, so we have one for Juan Manuel Marquez, and it was scored as a robbery by Run PMC, which is kind of rare, man. We've been going through all this, and Run PMC doesn't give that out too often, so that's saying something. All right, Nopal, what'd you think, man?
It was a great fight to score. You know, I was actually surprised. So there's 3 things that I focused on when I scored this fight, and I only watched it once. But one thing was, you know, the swing rounds. Now, these aren't true swing rounds. You know, it was just, I classified them as rounds that I think it's possible that, you know, they would give them to Manny because, you know, his flurries and all that. You know, people typically, every time Manny Pacquiao goes into a flurry, people typically give him the points whether he lands or not. That's one thing I noticed about his fights. And it's because the crowd goes crazy. You know, there's a lot of Filipinos in there and, you know, Manny Pacquiao fans, you know, which he has a lot of everybody backing him up because he is such a great fighter. But, you know, like, again, I say the swing rounds weren't real swing rounds. It was just, I thought that, you know, it was possible that the fans would score that round for Manny. So the swing rounds I put down was 1, 3, 4, 6, and then round 10. Yeah, round 10. So it was a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 swing rounds. And then the other classification I did is basically what rounds were clear. I think round 2 was clear for Marquez, and round 5 was clear for Marquez. Round 7 was clear for Marquez. Round 8, round 9, you know, round 11 and 12 were clear rounds for Marquez. Basically, I didn't score one clear round for Manny Pacquiao, and I ended up scoring this fight. It was 118 to 110, Marquez, and I only had Manny winning round 4 and round 10. That's it, basically. And throughout the whole fight, I was just wondering how Harold Letterman was scoring this, and you know, he really surprised me. I think there was 2 rounds where he clearly freaking robbed Juan Manuel Marquez. You know, I think it was round 10 and round 8 and 9. You know, he I think he scored those for Pac-Man, and you know, really that's when I started noticing that he was being hella biased, you know.
Yeah, man. And so you told me that you were kind of marking down rounds, not necessarily that you would find to be a swing round, that perhaps other people might find it to be a swing round. And so when you count those, could Pacquiao have won this fight, or is it a robbery in your mind?
Yeah. When you count those, Manny Pacquiao could have won the fight because, like I said, that it was round 1, 3, 4, 6, and oh wait, you might be right, Chicano. Not even with that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, when I add that 5 plus the 2 rounds which I did give to him, yeah, I guess he would have won 7 to 5 even with those rounds.
Damn. All right. Well, we got that from Nopal. Okay, let's see if it could be a sweep. Shawn Gringo Hicks, tell us, man, how did you score this fight?
All right, so it was definitely shocking to score the fight again, because narratives do come into play, and we kind of all touched on it as far as like, you listen to the broadcasters. So yeah, I was watching it, when I was watching it live over 10 years ago with family and friends, and just drinking and have a good time. You know, it did come into play. Like, I hate saying it now because I hate trying to focus on. I hope this fight happens so we can set up another super fight or whatever. I was so blinded by the fact, like, I wanted Pacquiao to win. Not that I'm not a Marquez fan. I love Marquez, but I wanted that Pacquiao Mayweather or Mayweather Pacquiao fight to happen. So I did have Pacquiao, goggles on, right? So that being said, by watching it again, it felt like I was watching it for the first time without bias. And what I honestly came up with, probably a little closer than you guys, but I did give it to Marquez 8-4. I felt like that he just put on a masterclass boxing. And I also remember something that came into play by watching it again, it felt more magnified watching it live, but I was like, oh man, well, he's making a huge mistake. When Nacho Berenstein, and they kept bringing that up, was saying that he's so far ahead when he actually was, he's winning the fight. And then, Run PMC brought up a good point that, Freddie Roach is being honest with Pacquiao and like, hey, you need to knock out, put him on his ass. Those things kind of got, well, not brushed over, but they didn't seem in line with what I thought was happening. But watching it again, it was definitely what took place. So I thought out of all the fights, obviously the fourth fight, that goes without question. I walked away after watching this fight. I was feeling like, Pacquiao just couldn't beat Marquez. As just one guy he just could not beat. And I was arguing with my brother Hopper. I messaged him and told him that I rescored it, and I've been kind of laughing at him like, oh man, Pacquiao won the third fight easy. It's non-debatable, but yeah, that's why we rescore him. So 8-4. I gave Pac 1. I'm kind of surprised that you guys said no to 10, but I gave him 1, 9, 10, and 12. That's what I gave Pacquiao, and other rounds were clearly for Marquez. But amazing performance, amazing career. I know he's turned into a Canelo hater, so y'all hate that, but inside the ring, man, he was special, and he had a special night. So by definition, like I said, I want to call it. Well, yes, I guess it is a robbery because I said 7-5, 8-4. I think more 9-3, but I think for the impact and what it would have meant, I get it is a robbery. But if it wasn't for that fight, I guess I'm being glass half full, right? We wouldn't have got the fourth fight, so when that turned out to be, the cherry on top, well, not the cherry, but like the a key marquee milestone in his career with the unbelievable knockout. So so 8-4 Marquez.
Oh man, well there you go. And it's like you all said, man, cash cow privilege does indeed exist. Like at the time, yeah, dude, they were all talking about the Pacquiao versus Mayweather fight. And still, man, like I said, I was nervous about this fight. I had great relief when Marquez did not hit the floor in this one. I'll tell you that. And so when I scored it again, I remembered, okay, well, no need to stress out. This fight it's already etched in history. It's fine. So just try to score it objectively. And Shawn, you made a great point earlier about the crowd kind of affecting like the way you saw the fight. There were a lot of like I said, it was like 50-50 in the actual crowd. So when you're just listening to the audience, when you're watching the actual fight itself, you're able to kind of see like the ebbs and flows of like, who's got momentum, who doesn't. This fight was excellent. Really great contrast of styles. Like I think that regardless of how these fights ultimately played out, I mean, these two are just like worthy adversaries. They'll be able to talk about these fights for a long time. They didn't really even need ropes for this fight. Like, it's almost like they were indeed fighting in a squared circle, like with an invisible rope kind of held between them. Like they were both there to fight. Pacquiao kind of being the aggressor, and then Marquez kind of being the defensive counter puncher. But there were a lot of times where Marquez was easy to find. He wasn't necessarily like moving around on the back foot at all. It's more like he was trying to always have his feet, in a nice position to be able to counter. So he's always kind of facing Pacquiao, always trying to keep that range to be able to counter. So, and then it was always Pacquiao dancing around. And so I ended up having the fight scored 9-3 for Marquez, which surprised me. I thought that I was going to have it either a little bit closer or maybe even a draw or Pacquiao winning. although I did have a lot of swing rounds. I think if you're really paying attention to the fight and actually like listening to the punches, I know, Shawn, you're starting to like that idea of turning the volume off, but I think power punching counts for something. So the sound of the punches helps me, you know what I mean, personally. And so when I was watching that, like there were a lot of times where Pacquiao would come in and just get pieced up. There was, I think it was somewhere in, it was in the 10th round where, Manny goes in and I don't want to say Marquez hasn't figured out, but Manny Pacquiao can also be kind of formulaic the way he kind of jabs his way in and kind of does his 1-2, and he goes in and he gets hit with this 2-piece, and then the ref kind of breaks him up a little bit, and Manny Pacquiao makes a sign of the cross. And I remember thinking like, God damn, this guy, he just got hit really hard, and Pacquiao had one hell of a chin, but it's not easy to just keep going in. Yeah, Roach is like, yeah, go in, knock this guy out. But I mean, and it kind of sucks too, because, it was kind of put on Pacquiao to kind of make a little bit of the action, because Marquez is patient, willing to just kind of sit there and wait for Pacquiao to come in, right? So, I mean, the pressure was on Pacquiao to make the fight, and I think that's, I don't know, I kind of think that's slightly unfair to the aggressor, to be honest with you. But still, Marquez was not hard to find. There was a lot of times where Pacquiao was kind of doing that nice head movement, bobbing and weaving, but it was kind of like fake moving forward, because sometimes Marquez would just stand his ground. And so Pacquiao was looking like he was trying to work his way in, but he was already there. It was just a matter of going in and pulling that trigger. You know what I mean? So I did have the fight 9-3 for Marquez, but I think there were a number of swing rounds where, and Lampley did make the point, and I think that's something that we've all come to figure out, is that, a lot of these rounds are up to interpretation. Even though we have the 4 parameters, Lampley makes that point of saying, well, hey, there are judges that favor certain styles, even if you count all those 4 parameters. And so I think, objectively speaking, if you were to watch this fight and purely judge it and try to tune everything out, I think that a judge should have Marquez winning this fight. But he wasn't the champion, and he wasn't the cash cow. So it doesn't surprise me. I think there were enough swing rounds, like Nopal said. I do classify it as a robbery, but I mean, if you're looking to kind of, keep the cash cow going, there was probably enough there to give it to Pacquiao. I would slightly call this one a robbery, but not like I don't know. I'm still articulating my thoughts on it. Actually, Shawn, I'm surprised this isn't one of those fights where you went back and watched the rounds again. You know what I mean? And again.
No, that's a funny point, because like actually I did. I guess I tried to cheat the system. Like we said, don't rewatch the fight. I would go back and rewatch rounds. Because like the first, like in a fight like this, every round is so significant. So like the first round when they were kind of filling each other out and it was real intense, I had to go back and make sure, like I don't want to make sure I just give Pacquiao, then I'm like, like no better than, the judges we had judging the fight. I want to make sure that he earned that round. So I went back and rewatched one, and I went back and rewatched the 12th round just to make sure. I mean, I was pretty safe, but you know what I mean? I don't want to assume any. That's the whole point. You can't assume you're a judge. You want to be definitive. This is a win. This is not a win, or it's a swing.
Who'd you give those to, Shawn, the first and the 12th?
I went the first round I gave to Pacquiao.
Okay.
And I get the 12th round I gave to Pacquiao, but I mean the 12th round Marquez was doing his victory lap at that point.
Yes.
But I wanted to make sure, because that's the thing. Like he was countering so well, and Nopal brought up a great point as far as like the flurries. I can't lie, I'm a sucker for the Pacquiao flurries, man. So I want to make sure I didn't get caught up in the flurry again, and I feel good about my scorecard. But you guys brought up great points, and man, I picked a hell of a fight, didn't I?
Yeah. No, it was good. And I agree with you. I gave Pacquiao also the first and the 12th. I judge a little bit different when I rewatch these fights. I watch it just one time through, and I have my score. I have the round scored usually before they even reach the corner. So I'm not swayed by any replays or anything. But one thing that I found interesting with this fight, just looking at it, is that this was also a catch weight. This is at 144 catch weight for this fight. So another catch weight for Pacquiao. Granted, Marquez was coming back up, so it's not that big of a deal. He's not weight draining someone down, so it's a little bit different, but still another catch weight. Another thing that was interesting is Dave Moretti, the older brother of Carl Moretti of Top Rank, was a judge for this fight, and I just double-checked on BoxRec just to make sure. This was Marquez's only second fight back with Top Rank after his stint with Golden Boy Promotions. So that might be something that has to deal with it. It's like, I don't know if Marquez was on like a fight-by-fight after this, because he stayed with Top Rank basically for the rest of his career. But after spending like 7 fights with Golden Boy, I don't think they might have wanted to have Marquez run back to Golden Boy with a belt and then fight Floyd again, possibly. And then, yeah, so I think that might have something to do with it. Another thing that I want to touch on that I've always thought about is that Harold Letterman in this fight confirmed that he uses punch stats to judge his rounds, because in the 10th round, middle of the 10th round, he was stating that, I'm giving this one to Pacquiao because he outlanded Marquez according to punch stats. I'm like, when I heard that, I'm like, that's something I've always wondered about, because I know it's a tool, but the real judges aren't privy to that knowledge. So I think that's definitely swaying the public and the perception of when people want to look at a fight, and I don't think that's right to sway the public in that manner. So, but also my last point, that's something that's not really about the fight, but it's about scoring, is that Robert Hoyle did an actual interview with this reporter. Maybe I think they're at a bar at dinner after this fight, and he was talking about just basically how he judges a fight. And he talks about how he breaks it down into 3 like mini rounds within a round, and it's sort of like a teeter totter about which way it's going. But at the he sort of just has those landmarks in his head at like the 2 minute, and then at the 1 minute, and then at the end, about who was winning at those points. So it's interesting to hear that directly from a judge, because usually when the judges get on camera, whether it's Kenny Bayless or his brother Kermit Bayless, they usually just talk about fights, but they don't talk about actually how they judge the fights. So it's definitely interesting. You could find that. You could just throw on YouTube. You could just say Robert Hoyle like Pacquiao 3, and then it'll pop up right away.
Great observations, man. And yeah, dude, I found myself also disagreeing with the way Letterman would kind of lay out, like how it was, okay, well, if their offense is the same, then, this is how you count defense or ring generalship. Like I didn't necessarily find myself agreeing with his logic. So I'm glad you made a point of kind of talking about that. And then the other thing that I wanted to say too was, when I was watching the fight, I've realized now, like I'm really starting to really zone in on like how I score a fight. And I realize that it's not the way to score, but I'm getting more comfortable with knowing how I score fights. And Marquez was the guy who was controlling the ring, but it's not necessarily like he was pushing the action either, So, Marquez maybe should have pushed the action a little bit. Like I think he did win the fight, but I mean, under the circumstances, I think he could have pushed it a little bit more. But I understand like why he had to keep that balance, why he wanted to keep that range. It was in his best interest to fight the way he did, but it maybe might not have been as clear on the night that he won the fight. Kind of a complicated issue. Like I said, there's that cash cow. Reigning defending champion, $100 million Mayweather fight issue. You know what I mean?
No, that's a great point. It's something that we touched on before with the Canelo Trout fight that I thought was significant for me. I'm trying to better understand, my comprehension of scoring and what's important for me. I mean, this is a unique thing with boxing. You can't just look at the box score, because the box score would indicate that Pacquiao ended 32 more punches and he threw 142 as far as work rate. Right. So effective aggression, which I know Harold Letterman brought up, he brought it up in a different context that I would. I mean, I felt like what you guys said, that, you could be effective aggression and control the ring without necessarily, throwing punches and lunging at somebody, the way that Marquez was. He's controlling it with his body positioning and, making sure to stay in front of, Pacquiao. So it was just beautiful boxing. And, another little two-cent thing for me, I mean, it's probably a nothing, but I think that it's probably random as hell, man. I had no idea how much I appreciated Tony Weeks as a referee,
Yeah.
man. He like really knows how to stay out of the action. Not like Kenny Bayless, who forces himself and, makes his presence known. I think that Tony Weeks did a great job, because that's we're talking about big time. So, maybe it was just his fight, but I've felt like that before. Like I always felt like he does a good job of balancing, of controlling it without making his presence be overbearing on the fighters and still, controlling the situation.
Oh yeah, and these two were both clean boxers, man. It was really enjoyable because, like you said, the ref really didn't get too involved, and they both, would touch gloves when it was appropriate. They didn't overdo it, but just to say, hey, we're both trying to be clean here. So I mean, the exchanges were great. And like I said, dude, Shawn, you said, I don't know, did you already go back and actually watch the first and second one again?
No, I did, and man, this is gonna be this is what I'm saying.
Do we need to go watch the second one again, man? Or
No,
what?
yeah, I watched all of them, and I feel like I had Pacquiao winning the. Well, I thought the first one I had Marquez winning all of them, to be honest.
Damn. Well, maybe we'll go back. You know what I mean? I should go back and
And that
watch
was
the
tough for
first
me
and
to
second
say,
one.
but I got it out. It's the
Hey,
truth.
that's okay. You know what?
Yeah.
Hey, man, sometimes the truth is the truth, And so, like I said, this one surprised me, man. I always thought that, to be honest with you guys, like before the fourth fight and the Marquez knockout, I thought that, this was just like, the Mexicans kind of being a little bit bitter about Pacquiao just going through like, Morales, Barrera, De La Hoya, and Marquez, those first two fights. So when they were like, oh, Marquez won. Like, I always thought it was just a little bit of like saltiness, but like I said, maybe I just didn't know any better. You know what I mean? Because I had thought Pacquiao was well, I thought the second one could have gone either way, but I remember thinking Pacquiao won the first. Haven't watched it in a really long time. You know what I mean? But I thought that third one, I was like I said, I got fucked up that night. But I remember thinking, oh yeah, that Pacquiao, he won that one. You know what I mean? To me, I wasn't outraged. You know what I mean? But now I'm glad that I went back and I watched this one.
No, definitely. I mean, I would say like I would definitely encourage everybody to watch these fights because they are, two master craftsmen at their height of their powers and an unbelievable matchup. I mean, and that's the thing. We're talking about, Pacquiao losing rounds, but he had unbelievable moments. Like his footwork. I mean, I know Harold Littleman, Jim Lampley about to pass out, just falling all over the footwork. But the footwork was phenomenal, man. Like,
Yeah.
especially I think I put a note on here like the 7th round, and I had him losing that round. And the 9th round, like, I mean, it was like unbelievable, like how we go in and out and dart, and that's part of what makes it magical. But it was more flurries, and like I said, I kind of found myself scoring the flurries as winning the round. But if you actually looked as far as the scoring, an effective shot, Marquez just landed throughout him until he stopped him in that 4th fight that they had. So I had I don't know exactly scoring, but I remember rewatching them. Yeah, Marquez won all 4 fights, like no question, no doubt. And I'm not, I'm actually a Pacquiao fan. I respect them both, but I'm a Pacquiao fan. So it was tough, but hey, I got out.
All right, man. Anybody got anything else before we move on to wrap things up?
I have one more thing, and I feel like I say this every time, but the way we get like these like legendary fights or fights we go back to rescore that are very competitive, or maybe not this one, but it's viewed as competitive, it's because the fighters are actually fighting each other. It's not just they're fighting each other on Twitter or social media. They're actually getting in the ring, lacing it up, and fighting each other. And that's what we need, because like we've missed out on some big fights that might not have been like that would have been competitive fights for us to watch. Like even like Jermell Charlo against undefeated Jared Hurd. That's a big fight, and they both lost since then. Deontay Wilder undefeated against Anthony Joshua undefeated. We missed out on that one. We can't keep missing out on these fights because sooner or later these guys are going to get old. Like Shawn Porter, who seems like he was just in his prime, is now retired. So
Right.
we can't lose any more of these moments, or if not, this generation of boxing is just going to be like a lull in boxing history, sort of like the heavyweight division was, sort of like when the Klitschko's were in it. It was just like a lull. Not saying not down in the Klitschko's. I'm just saying there was a lull, and it's like if you guys want to be remembered as boxers in the history books, like great boxers, then you have to do something because Shawn Porter, 2-time champion, probably not going to be in the Hall of Fame just because, and he fought everyone of this generation, but it's like you have to also have to win. But I give props to Shawn Porter for getting in there, but that's why we need to see Spence Crawford. We need to see these fights because it's like even Spence Crawford's elevated. Spence has gotten in a car accident, and now we don't know if he's damaged goods or not. Like
Right.
all these fights are like these should have been 3 big fights that we had, and it pisses me off as a boxing fan that we didn't get any of them when we should have. When we probably won't get, we probably won't see Jermell versus Hurd, not at 154, maybe at 160. But who's Hurd now? He just lost to Luis Arias, like, and then we probably won't get Joshua Deontay Wilder just because just the politics of what it is, and it's like, are we going to miss out on Spence Crawford now? It's like we can't keep doing this to ourselves.
I wanted to say one thing about the fight. Going back to the Pacquiao and Juan Manuel Marquez. It was a point that you were making, Chicano, about Pacquiao's doing most of the work. If you actually if you look at it, he's the one trying the most to get in there. But I think by this time, Marquez had figured out that if he kind of just stood his ground positioning and just kept his movement a little with his hands and kind of a little more flat-footed, follow Pacquiao a little bit in his direction, Pacquiao was just going to come in there and then he could just nail Pacquiao coming in. By this time, he had figured out that that's basically mostly what he had to do. So, when somebody's judging these type of fights, they're kind of, you got to realize that this is the biggest cash cow, one of the two biggest cash cows in boxing. And they're seeing how much effort Pacquiao's doing with the flurries and all that. And he's taking the biggest risk in this fight by going in and trying to hit Marquez. Marquez is kind of just staying there, which I think even Marquez laid down the blueprint to beat Manny Pacquiao. This is probably similar to what Ugas did. He kind of stood there, and as soon as Pacquiao would try to get in there, he'd hit him with the jab. Marquez used other punches, but I guess that's basically the blueprint for Manny Pacquiao. But at the same time, the judges are, they're itching for rounds to give to Manny Pacquiao, and he doesn't got to do much to score. I mean, to score a round. So and we learned this from scoring all these fights, that the cash cow doesn't have to do as much as the other guy. So if you look at the big picture, big picture wise, this is what let Juan Manuel Marquez know that if he got one more chance to get this fight, he was going to have to win by knockout because, it would have been had to be something dramatic for him to get the win over over Pacquiao.
Yeah, I have one thing to add about what Manny was doing because it's like I think it was Chicano that said it, that it was like almost false head movement where he's sort of like making the illusion like he's doing things, and you saw it a lot in the fourth fight where it's like he's just sitting there and like moving his body, swaying back and forth. But that's not what when Freddie wanted him to work on head movement, it meant like moving your head away from punches. And it's like Manny did have these angles, but he would come in sometimes off these angles and Marquez would just smash him with punches. So it's like the analogy I think about is if you have like a pitcher that's throwing like 100 miles an hour in baseball, but then the guys are still hitting him. It's like it looks nice, but they're still effective against him. So I mean, Pacquiao does like his ability to do things was amazing in the ring, but Marquez is just the guy that had his number and was just tagging him all night. But I could see definitely when you're saying, no, Paul, about how the judges are itching, but then that's bad judging if they're doing that. If you're just looking to give someone the benefit of the doubt, then that's improper judging. They're not going off the criteria, and they should be looked at for that, because even when the commentators say like, oh, it's all comes down to what you like and your style you favor. Yes, that's an inherent bias you have as a person, but it really doesn't come down to it. It comes down to what you're supposed to score. So but I totally see what you're saying about what they're trying to give to him. But it's like, that's us like acknowledging that is automatically acknowledging that the sport scoring is biased.
I mean, it's true, and I agree with what Nopal said too, and what you said, Ron. Like, but yeah, man, like Pacquiao was the one taking the risks, and he was the one making the fight. Like Marquez did stand his ground, and he was the one with the stinging counter punches, man, where Pacquiao didn't really want to come in anymore, So it's a complicated issue, but I think we can chalk this one up as a robbery. I think we've only had 2.5 robberies now. I think we agree that the what did we say? We said the Whitaker Chavez was maybe. Gringo said no, but me and Run said yes. So maybe you could count that one. And then Holyfield Lewis 1 was indeed a robbery. We could chalk this one up as a second robbery, but with a learning lesson for I don't know. Like I said, man, what Marquez was doing was strategic, but it wasn't. I don't know, man. Like I said, just a learning lesson. That's all I can say. All right, man. Well, hey, that was an awesome one. Thank you so much, Shawn, for recommending that one. And now, we're on to this next one that I want to cover, because you know what? We need to get to the Canelo versus Lara fight. I want to do them in order, and it's time, but I don't think that we can do that without first getting another robbery out of the way, because I want to know where Lara stands before this fight. We're going to take a look at Erislandy Lara versus Paul Williams. Now, I have heard for a long time that this was a controversial fight. I've never seen it, dude. I don't recall seeing it. Like I said, this was before I was way into it. This one was just like, it wasn't on my radar. Did you guys watch this one at the time?
Yes.
Yep, I watched this fight.
All right. And how'd you guys have it?
You know what? I wanted to add something before we do the Lara Canelo one. Can we also do I know that it was stoppage, but can we also do the Lara versus Angulo, just so we could get some perspectives of different styles that Lara can use, or different game plans that he employs when he fights fighters.
Was that before
You know, because
the Laura Canelo fight?
Yeah, it
Was
was
it
I
after?
think, yeah,
It was before.
yeah, I think it was before.
Let me double
before.
check on BoxRec, but I'm pretty sure it was before.
I think that fight was only like 7 rounds, but nevertheless, a lot of people, or including the scoring, I think it had Lara ahead. So, not just because of that, but I'm saying it'll give us a perspective of different styles that Lara is able to use to win. You know what I mean?
That's the one where Lada had the big hematoma, right?
Yeah, Pedro Angulo.
Lara had the big hematoma in the Williams fight, and then
Oh, okay.
Angulo had the big hematoma when Lara hit him with the double left hand at the end.
Okay.
Yeah,
I know some hematomas in there somewhere. All right.
Yeah.
I'm
Not
good with-
Hasim Rahman. The one against in this fight, the Lara Williams fight, was pretty bad, and that's something that we could talk about next week when we talk about the Lara Williams. Is how do we actually score damage to the face, or are we going by the criteria? Because that's interesting things that come up, like in the Bradley Provatnikov fight, Provatnikov Algieri fight of recent years, that you think about. A lot of them, like, sometimes I feel that some of the unofficial scores, when they don't want to sway, when they want to sway the public in a certain way, they'll say, well, who would you rather be in there? Look at their faces or something like that. It's like, no, you're still supposed to score the fight. So, but yeah, Lara Williams is a good fight. I mean, I'll save it for next week, but I haven't watched it since live because I felt like I didn't need to watch it after. But it's a good one, I guess.
No, I'm down.
Yeah.
Well, hey, man, if it's controversial, you know what I mean? So,
yes.
Ron, you're making it sound like it might be a snoozer, man. Is that what you're telling me?
It's not a snoozer. You'll see Lara. You'll be surprised how, if I remember correctly, you'll be surprised on the style that Lara has in this fight. Maybe not, but he lands a lot. You'll see.
Yeah. No, I don't want to steal Run PMC's thunder because he's the man, but this is the Lara I was hoping for with Canelo. So
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's a good
Interesting. All right. And the last thing I want to say about, somebody getting marked up and a judge scoring that, like, I do have to say that I think if you jack up somebody's face and it's evident, that's a sign of effective aggression. Right. But we could talk about that a little bit more. Like, I'm still evolving my thoughts on that.
Bros, so
what's up?
Can we sneak both of them in together just to get things rolling a little
That's
faster?
up to the rest of the homies. I'm down as long as the timeline is good. You know what I mean?
I watched the same fight 4 times, so I mean, I'm down. I mean, I watched rounds over like 5 times. So
down for it. Yeah.
So it'll be Lara Williams and Lara Angulo.
Yep.
All right.
So
Just remember, Paul, that you're making me watch about 20 rounds of Arislandi Lara, which might not be a bad thing, I guess, but you're gonna owe me. Okay, that's all I'm saying.
Nah, actually, I think these fights are good. These are
I think Chicano, you're gonna be surprised, brother. Like, this is the Lara that this is Lara at his most active. I don't want to say at his best, at his most active.
Sweet, man. Well, I'm looking forward to it. Thank you guys so much for joining us and tuning in. And for the guys at El Chile, we are gonna head on out. We'll see you all next week. Bring your scorecards. Peace.